Mark can stand. He's good.
Respect your elders, sir.
Respect your elders. Where's your OC chair?
I'll sit on that. It's actually pretty comfortable.
There you go. Jacob's got you.
All right, grab a chair.
Thank you, sir.
Wake up.
We need one more. Grab another chair. I ain't the chair, dude. Go get another chair. I'm the only disabled vet up here. Y'all should be getting chairs. Why did I think it was 4 chairs already and I was bringing the 5th? You know what I'm saying? I swore it was. Did somebody take a chair? I don't need a microphone. Check one. I gotta sit next to Chief. They're gonna act crazy.
Dude, I'm going to throw all the questions to you. Cool. So, Carl Gruner's like, Chief Gill, can you talk a little bit about this? And we're like, no, sir, I can't, but
Jacob Hill can.
No problem. I always think Mike's
already on.
Mike, you're gonna stick you in the middle. Pardon me? You want to get in the middle?
Sure, Malcolm in the middle.
Okay, Mike, what's the slide look like?
Oh. You want to lean out and look? Hey, Mike, do you want to go on the other side of the room and then let Alex sit over here?
No, I prefer Scott up here.
Can you run against Scott? It's okay. I thought that might change your mind. Sitting in 3 languages.
I will be the note taker, okay?
You are? You want a bigger notebook? I'll be the copy taker.
so we're going to change this up. When he pitches it to me, I'm going to say, well, sir, I have nothing to say. However, Mike Terry,
Who used to be a recruiter? I don't trust anything he says.
Where's J.O.? I just found a page that said Mr. Hill. Huh? Haven't seen anything.
that's how you start a panel, awkward silence. So you can't echo it from the front row. You got to go to the back and echo it.
No, what I do really is just, if the really tough question again, just say, that question is so simple, we just get a lot better later than that.
I'm not going to even take to find out what the response is.
Yeah.
Hey, have you got the script? Yeah. I need the script. Unscrew.
Now that the criminal element is showing up. No pressure here, right?
Yeah. You don't come right in front.
Pressure hold my spit
fourth row back. Lieutenant Colonel back. Lieutenant Colonel back. Fourth company, third back. Yep. So, Greg Wells came to Tennessee to see me during the first of this year. So he went out to the box and he did some stuff for me. So, for the battle hunt. It's funny because a lot of this crowd, a lot of the dudes I know, all people from that came out there to see me in TC already know this stuff anyway. Yeah.
Please take a seat. Welcome to our presentation and discussion. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Juan Grüttner, a German exchange officer in the Cyber Center of Excellence Doctrine Division, in the position as a Lessons and Best Practices branch chief. Are you asking yourself, what would you expect from a German attacknet? Oddly enough, there is a German AFCIA chapter, and there is a similar event like TechNet in Koblenz. The German Acquisition Office is located in Koblenz, which happened to be my last duty assignment, and I also lived in Koblenz. So if you are ever in Germany, take a ride to Koblenz and have a look. I'm glad to be here, and it's an honor for me to speak you at TechNet. Before we start the discussion, let me give you a brief introduction what the Lessons and Best Practices branch is doing. Lessons and Best Practices branch has 15 personnel, 3 military, 1 civilian, and contractor support with 8 analysts, 2 of which are stationed outside for Gordon, 1 at the National Training Center for Irvin, and 1 at the Joint Readiness Training Center for Prague. The contractor support also provides a configuration manager, web moderator, and a publicist. The task of the Lessons and Best Practices branch is to collect, analyze, validate observations, and to disseminate approved lessons learned, best practices, TDPs, of cyberspace, electronic warfare, and signal operations, with the goal of increasing the effectiveness of cyberspace, electronic warfare, and signal operations in the operating and generating force. We collect observations from the active National Guard, Army Reserve, during NTC, JRTC, unit warfighter exercises, and from experiments like CyberQuest and CyberBlitz. As we collect observations, we ensure they are not just one-time occurrence, and they are categorized as a trend or gap based on .mil PFP. We identify concerned stakeholders to solve a trend, a gap, and we disseminate lessons learned, best practices, and TTPs through the Cyber COE Lessons and Best Practices website, hosted by Landwehr Warnet University, and also on the Joint Lessons Learned Information System website, IAW Army Regulations 1133, the Army Lessons Learned program. You see the topics and areas we made our key observations. Before I will start the discussion, the panel members will introduce themselves.
Good morning. Still morning. I'm the JRTC Lessons of Best Practices Analyst, and I'm Mark Duncan. Thanks.
I'm Lewis Crane. I am one of the Cyber COE Lessons and Best Practices Analysts stationed here at the Cyber COE.
I'm Mr. Mike Terry, retired in 2008 after 34 years, regimental sergeant major. Since then, have taken the job as the lead contract analyst for lessons and best practices.
Good morning, CW2 James Gill. So I am the EW technician in Doctrine Lessons and Best Practices here at the COE.
Good morning, Mr. Jacob Newell. I'm one of the analysts for the CyberShield station right here in Fort Worth.
It is not a discussion of the panel members only. You, the audience, are invited to ask questions, make remarks, give suggestions, recommendations, directions, and perhaps solutions, because we need your knowledge, experience, and technology to solve gaps and problems. To start the discussion, let me ask the first question to Chief Jill. You saw at NTC many brigade combat teams and took care of electromagnetic warfare. Which skills do soldiers in a brigade combat team need to fight and win in a contested electromagnetic spectrum?
Well, sir, first, thank you for asking the question, and I think that your question really hits the nail on the head. So the problem of a contested EMS is not a signal corps problem, it's not a cyber problem or EW problem, it's an Army problem. And so that was something that we recognized at NTC very, very quickly. So over the past 15 years, we've been fighting in a counterinsurgency type fight, low intensity conflict. The Army has recognized that we need to get back to some of those fundamental warfighting skills that we always had but have neglected. So in NTC and JRTC now, we find a decisive action training environment that is a hybrid environment of peer, near-peer threats, as well as kind of the non-state actor type threats that we faced over the years. So when we introduce those peer and near-peer threats again, along with that come threats in the electromagnetic spectrum that we have not had to deal with for the past 15 years. Those skills have atrophied across the force. So at NTC, we did some rudimentary jamming training. We did a little bit of GPS jamming training. However, it was not really getting through to the force. We were learning some bad TTPs from it. So we reached out to the community, and through the community and some of our industry partners, we introduced live jamming into the training, live comms jamming into the training. What we quickly realized was, because this hadn't been trained in so long, the skills had atrophied and units can't recognize it. So that in itself was the biggest problem that we faced. And of course, GPS was the same issue. And through our partners at SMDC, Space and Missile Defense Command, we've gotten a lot of help with training soldiers. Training is really the biggest part of it, being exposed to it and training it. One of the problems that we have, though, is that units are not exposed to it until they get to the CTCs. So those skills that we need, things like recognizing interference on the radio, things like masking yourself in the spectrum, decreasing your footprint in the spectrum. We hear a lot about decreasing our footprint in our tactical operations centers, but not necessarily decreasing our footprint in the spectrum that gives those operations centers away. Skills like that need to be developed at home station. The problem is that we haven't had that capability to train at home station, so units would come to the CTC, be exposed to it for the first time, and really be exposed for the lack of training that they had. Those are really the skills, though, that we're looking at when we're talking about coming to and operating in a contested EMS. So recognizing the individual soldier, being able to recognize jamming, the individual soldier knowing what to do about that, being able to report it up to someone else so that it can be actioned. But even on the EW side of the house, and really the Signal Corps side of the house too, because we have our spectrum managers, recognizing that it's not just a contested environment, but also a congested environment. Understanding the things that are going on around us that we have to plan against to make sure we find those seams that we can get through in the spectrum to ensure that we're able to accomplish the mission. Sir?
Thank you very much. When you have a question, remark, and so on, give us a sign. Wait a second, you get a microphone.
Well, I used to be a recruiter, so I don't mind talking. One of the things, and Chief talked about kind of in a broad sense, but let me give you some of the observations that we've actually seen. Last year was out at Fort Hood 3 Corps at a conference, and at one NTC rotation, they decided to challenge the unit by shutting down the entire upper TI. So they called the regional hub node and said, shut them down. So the unit struggled. I brought that up at the three-corps conference, and one young major raised his hand, and I said, yes, sir. He said, I still have the scars. He was the S6 at the time. So they're still trying to figure out those types of things, that if you lose that entire upper TI, how do you fight the rest of it? Another example is we had one of our folks at an exercise. The unit was being jammed, so their method of dealing with the jamming was to turn down the volume on the radio. So as Chief talks about these skills that we got to get back to, some of you in the audience may remember when you had the old soldier's manual of common task. In there was jamming. How do you fill out a MEG report? How do you recognize it? How do you mitigate it? So those are kind of some of the things as Chief talks about training that we need to get back to. I know SMDC's got a GTA card out there right now that talks to it. I think Asymmetric Warfare Group's been doing some work on that as well. So there are things out there, and when we talk about home station training, Chief, if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about what SMDC has offered up to do for that.
So I absolutely will, and I know since I have SMDC in the audience, they will correct me very quickly if I say anything wrong. However, I have nothing but praise to sing about SMDC's home training. So SMDC goes out to every single brigade combat team that is going to rotate either through NTC or JRTC and gives them training on things to do specifically in what they call the D3 SOE environment, denied, degrade, disrupted space operations environment. Okay, thank you, Cromwell. So, but a lot of the times what the individual soldier is going to really see in that environment is GPS interference, GPS loss, GPS jamming. And so SMDC has stepped up the game to educate soldiers across the force on what to do when GPS goes out. Now, I know a lot of people in the audience, you've been in the Army for a while, or you were in the Army for a while, and your solution is probably, well, map and compass. Yeah, that sounds great. But the problem became that because we were so reliant on those GPS-type systems, that training went away. Now, that training is coming back, and that's great stuff. But SMDC also goes out and it educates them on some of the electronic protection techniques that are already inherent in their system. So specifically the dagger. When you key a dagger, you put the ComSec into a dagger, it can tell you if it's getting jammed, if it thinks it's getting jammed. Not only that, SMDC's gone out and shown some of these formations. When it tells them it's getting jammed, here are ways that you could actually use the dagger to help find the jammer. That's all great stuff, and we saw the benefit. It took a little while, but we definitely saw the benefit at NTC when units would rotate through. It literally was night and day, from units rotating through, having no clue how a dagger operates, not putting any kind of ComSec into it, to all of a sudden the entire formation has it. Not only that, but every time they get some kind of jamming alert, multiple personnel are trying to find this jammer, just based off of what SMDC taught them.
Mark, you want to tell them a little bit about the recent rotation, the 29 Echo?
So this last rotation we had ended about 2 weeks ago at JRTC. There was a single staff sergeant, 29 Echo, who was filling the EWO role at the brigade level. And she, first of all, their battle drills, they didn't initially show up to JRTC with battle drills. About mid-rotation, they had battle drills for GPS jamming, cyber intrusion, ComSec compromise. Now, this is a National Guard unit, so they don't get a lot of time to necessarily train. However, the Staff Sergeant 29 Echo did an excellent job once the battle drills were sent to the battalions. So they were able to detect GPS jamming, locate the jammers. Now at JRTC, we have what's called the NEATS system. It's a low-power jammer that the OCTs can walk around with and pretty much pinpoint wherever they want. So they were able to detect that through use of their battle drills, and hopefully those battle drills make it into their SOP. But that's one thing that I've noticed. When units come to JRTC, they lack the SOPs and they lack battle drills. So.
And just to add to that's one of the reasons we try to hit them up roughly 180 days out to assist them with identifying those gaps.
Jacob, you want to talk a little bit about the cyber?
So now that we talked about some of the challenges that we have, let's talk about some of the exercises that are actually addressing these challenges. As an LMDP analyst, I was able to, I call myself the all things cyber guy, learning a lot to where we're going. CyberShield was a National Guard event. 30 enclaves, National Guard soldiers, they were able to attack it from a perspective of the fact that they, as they say, that this is their all-day job. This is what they do every day. We have a lot of, they were combined with industry. They were attached at the hip with them. They were addressing some Title 13, Title 32 issues. I have all that information and data. That's what we do with lessons and best practices. We collect this information, and I'll talk to you a little bit more later about Gillis. Cybertropolis and Muscatatuck, where we know we have issues with the SCADA systems. You don't even need to tell you if you've been watching the news, the whole near-peer issues that we had. I'm not going to go into detail with it in this forum, but it's open source. You can Google it. But I want to make sure that you understand that they are addressing these issues. They are doing it in real life. They're doing it in real world. They're bringing in the cyber protection teams. They're using academia. They're using industry to solve these issues. Also, CyberQuest, which is a co-led CERTIC and Cyber COE event. We have the representatives right here in the room right now that was held from the 5th to the 29th of May. That's when we brought in industry to try to answer some of these gaps that were provided by our TICMs, the TICM Cyber, the TICM EW, the TICM TR, the TICM NNS, to fill these gaps and answer these questions. You know, necessity is the mother of all invention. Sometimes we bring out outside entities, they may be able to fill these gaps and bring forth new change and new technology. And leading up, those gentlemen sitting on the front row, Mr. Matt Pacerno, raise your hand there, Mr. Matt, and Ray Aldevar, did I say it correctly? Almodovar. I'll do push-ups later. I won't profile. And Mr. Jeremy, I don't remember his last name, he's the network architect. Their event will be 11th through 29th of September. That's Cyber Blitz, where we're all in it for the same thing. And then on the National Guard and the Reserve side, we have Cyber Guard. All those exercises are now talking to each other. We're finding the answers and we're providing them out. We're pushing those answers out through what should be the sole repository for lessons and best practices, which is GILIS, which is the Joint Lessons Learned Information System. After this, if you're interested in knowing how to access that, if you're a CAC card authenticated user, I will personally walk you through it. We will walk you downstairs, get you registered, and we will point you in the direction. I think I see the gentleman in the back. We just finished building their architect for lessons and best practices on GILIS and sending it, the hierarchy to them. We broke it down by TICMs. We broke it down by sections. So anyone could go in and dissect that event and see what went well, what were the challenges, what we can do better, what we got out of the industry standards, and I think that it'll help in the future. If you look at our sign downstairs on our banner, it says, "Given the answers to the test." We want to give you the answers to the test.
So we have any questions from the audience this time? Go ahead, Lieutenant Colonel Luck. Oh, never mind. I think Chief Stewart got you first.
Chief Stewart, 18th Airborne Corps, EW technician. My question is to the entire panel, anybody that can answer. How does lessons learned help standardize the training through ForceCom so that individual units all, they get specifically the same standardized training, because not all units get to rotate through NTC to get some of that awesome, big time or training that's going on down there. Some units don't get down to JRTC. That home station training that you all are talking about, how do we standardize that? When you read ForceCom's training requirements for electronic warfare, it just says, electronic warfare and cyber, it just says train in a contested or congested environment. That does really nothing to help the warfighter at the lower level.
I can grab a piece of that, Chief. The CTCs are not the only visits we make. We've been out to the warfighter exercises, and as was mentioned here, to some of the Guard and Reserve things. But a lot of what we capture, if it's institutional, if it's training at the institution, we bring that back. We have a process on that 5-phase process. It's called the Observation Community of Practice. And basically what that's for is to get after those gaps, if it's in education, if it's in doctrine, whatever it might be in, and we hold that on a quarterly basis. and subject matter experts grab the topic and run with it. I'll give you a good example real quick. One of our early visits out to what was originally called Cyber Support Corps and Below rotations and then became SEMA Support Corps and Below. If you're familiar with the WIN-T Increment 2, it's got HPSS, ACAS, and ESM for the computer network defense tools. Well, what we discovered in our visits out there was, although those are resident on the system, they were not being trained at the schoolhouse. Because the MOSs were so new, and in trying to develop those tasks they were going to train, they basically went with predominantly SANS training. So we brought that back, ended up doing a cybersecurity tool gap analysis for then General Fogarty, the Cyber COE Commanding General. So they were able to take that and wedge some of that into the training at the schoolhouse so that everybody gets it. And we're working with CCOM and some other folks to get it out to the rest of the Army as far as getting them the training in those tools, because nothing was more frustrating for a young kid to show up and say, okay, here's your cybersecurity tools, and he said, never seen them before and can't help you. And they muddle through it. They eventually get it. So those are the kinds of things we do. And as Jacob mentioned, Joint Lessons Learned Information System is where we will post those observations when they become active. After we've done all the analysis, the .mil PFP analysis, and kind of try to determine where the gap is, then it's posted onto GILIS. But we make a lot of trips out. You talk about being up there. We spend a lot of time talking to the MCAT team out of FORCECOM, the TAC C4 division. Partner with them to see what they're seeing. On the signal side of the house, we have what's called the S6 COP, where S6s and signal officers around the formations will call in and ask for assistance on something. We recently started collaborating with them and say, okay, what's your top 10? What are the top 10 requests you get from the field? Number one request I get from the field right now is speed on the spectrum. So what we do is we say, okay, we add that to the collection plan that the analysts go out with, and we talk to any formation we go to, say, hey, what are your problems with speed? What version are you on? What's the problem you're incurring? Then we go back and we talk to the developers. What was interesting is the National Guard formation that Mark talked about is one of the folks that worked in the unit on his civilian job helped develop speed. That's what he did out there in Indiana. So we try to get those lessons out ahead of something that's going to happen, like a CTC rotation. But if you've got questions, if you've got your own observations that we need to know that we haven't talked about, Jacob, when he talks through that whole process, will show you how to submit an observation. We just got probably about a 2-page thing from the 57th ESB out at Fort Hood after a visit last week. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I sure enjoyed talking.
Hey, so I'm gonna add on to what Mike said, and I think this might get to some of what you're looking for too. So I'm the new guy up on this panel, and I'm still learning my way through what all these guys do. They have their hands in so many cookie jars, I can't even keep count. One of the big ones, though, that we participate is the Army Lessons Learned Forum. So that is conducted by call out of Fort Leavenworth. And right now, on their next round of observations, we have already put one up there on almost exactly what we're talking about here on this panel, operating in a contested environment. And so what we at Lessons and Best Practices have done, we've done some initial analysis on gaps associated with that problem and who needs to be responsible for that, whether that be FORCECOM, TRADOC, some other COE. And we're making recommendations through that panel that will go through Lieutenant General Lundy, who's the commander of CAC-T up there, on what actions need to be taken across the entire Army to solve those problems. So, for example, one of the recommendations that we saw was a lack of common tasks. So I think Mike mentioned we used to have a media report, or Lou mentioned it, one of you two, I'm sorry, I forgot who, but we suggested that up. That is a gap that we see. We don't have that training anymore. So getting that into the forum will get somebody pegged to be the lead for that, more than likely TRADOC, to develop those common tasks in conjunction with us to make sure that we get that right for the common soldier in the institutional level. On the operational side, so we talked a lot about what SMDC did. We're taking SMDC's model as an example.
and saying, hey, we need cyber and EW training at home station. Because, I mean, we hit it right. Mark hit it right. By the time you get to NCC or JRTC, it's too late. And just like you said, not everyone goes through there. And even if they go through there, if they're not part of the VCT, they might not ever see any of that. So home station training is a big piece. We just had a big conference at CAC to discuss enhancing capabilities at the CTCs, and everyone kept harping on, well, we've got to have home station, got to have home station. We have that up in the Army Lessons Learned Forum now, so we're getting after those problems.
Good morning. Lieutenant Colonel Aaron Luck from SMDC. So I see smart T use was one of your topics there. Yesterday, Major General Baker talked about the fact that, you know, when he was a battalion commander, had all of his smart Ts fielded and they were bringing him great things. And then he said in recent experience that nobody even deploys them. So as we see out of the training centers, do we see an increase in units that are bringing those things out of the motor pool, and are they having any success in using them, especially as we can test them in maybe some of their other areas of the spectrum?
So, sir, yeah, I'll take that. So we already had it mentioned that a unit from 3rd Corps had to live through the pain of an upper TI denial, a denied SEMA environment is what NTC is calling it. And yes, we saw that unit in particular brought out their smart T, and they were able to regain limited upper TI access from the smart T. So we have seen an increase as word has proliferated through the force that this is going to happen to you when you go to the CTCs. There is increased use of it. We're pulling it out. A lot of guys are, you know, dusting off the textbooks and the TMs on it, relearning how to use it, and there is some pain associated with that. But yes, we are seeing increased use of that.
They're actually sending their soldiers back to do refresher training and retraining right here.
And the other piece that goes along with that, we talk smart T. HF use is way up, especially as kind of a long-haul tactical communication. We see a lot at the CTCs, especially in the cavalry squadrons that are going out front and screening for the rest of the force. But it's proliferating to the rest of the unit as well. And the other thing I'll bring up are the line-of-sight systems, so the HICLOS radios. As we go into that SEMA-denied environment where we're taking down the upper TI, they don't have that satellite access anymore. HICLOS is another way that they're able to get around that sometimes.
Hey, going back to Smart T real quick. So at JRTC, we have been seeing an uptick in brigades bringing Smart Ts to training, to the CTC. However, maintenance on the Smart Ts and complaints from soldiers asking, why are we going back to this 10-year-old technology? And I try to tell them, hey, look, it's secure. It's secure. There's an active cyber OPFOR threat at the CTCs. If your upper TI goes down, hey, you have a point-to-point. If you have 2 smart Ts, you know, this brigade can talk to division, wherever they want to talk. But they're showing up with the lack of maintenance. The stuff's not even entered into the OLS or the SAMS 1 e-box. So ordering parts for this stuff, this is a trend that I've been seeing at JRTC.
Fort Hood talked about getting soldiers out there with weed whackers, cutting down all the weeds in the corner of the motor pool looking for their smart Ts.
And these are active units. The Guard a little bit further behind.
Greg Wells from the Cyber Battle Lab. I see defense in depth, but I see some cyber security, and then some of these other EMIs, EAs. As far as training, because that's been most of the questions, what are we doing in the schoolhouses and from lessons learned to go back and teach these maneuver commanders, the integration between intelligence and EW, how to take and move the SEMA cell forward, how to actually get the right training, as Chief Stewart was asking about, those directives of exposing them to what right looks like as far as a maneuver commander, because 11 Bang Bang wants to see it go boom, but they don't know anything about the EMI or anything else. So as lessons and best practices, taking anything back as far as training at pre-command course, captain careers course, ILEs?
I would say yes. As Chief mentioned, the Army Lessons Learned Forum, we put forth multiple recommendations, and a lot of that is to get that into all levels of PME, all the way up to the pre-command course taught at Leavenworth. The other thing that we've really started participating a lot more in this year than we have the past is getting out to the initial planning conference, the D-180 that the divisions and brigades have. And a part of that is the planners out of the CTCs attend that, and it's an opportunity to get those kinds of things into the training plan, because as you talk about, they spend millions of dollars to go out there and launch, you know, artillery, armor rounds, bullets, and everything else, and the domain of cyber is kind of an afterthought, and we've actually had them tell us that, you know, in some of our rotations and go out and visit during the D-180. But I think the consciousness of when you lose your upper TI, like what happened out there at the NTC and those things, it's almost a strategic communications plan that has to happen. You've got to convince those commanders that what it is they're trying to do, if they can't talk about it, they can't get it done. So it's going to be a slow and steady process. It's kind of like when Chief talked about going, you know, into a date environment versus a coin environment. It's a slow process. They struggled mightily when they first started going into a date environment at the CTCs. So we're hoping that it works its way into the consciousness.
Yeah, so Greg, some of this stuff is in its infancy, but it is happening. So our cyber support element that's out at Fort Leavenworth does the pre-command courses out there. They're reaching out to some of the other COEs and doing pre-command course. They're doing maneuver COE pre-command courses now, which we're in its infancy. I think they just did their first one. It was a little rough, but we're going to get better. At the same time, we have the Army Leaders Cyber Operations course that they are pushing that out too. That was started really by our cyber in conjunction with the CSCB rotations. They're expanding that out, doing MTTs out to whoever wants it really now. So the word is getting out there more. Now, as far as getting more EW stuff into that, we're working on that too. It's very cyber heavy right now. But yes, especially for the tactical commanders, and I know you know this because I told you this and you saw it, EW is a big thing, especially at the brigade and below level.
Greg, you also saw that at CyberQuest, you know, we'll highlight that event that we had. We were asking the soldiers, the infantry soldiers, to use the soldier as a sense of concept. Because we're using the soldier as a sense of concept, we also got to make sure that that academia and especially industry understand that they have to make these new tools available using the KISS method, the keep it simple soldier type of thing, where it's plug and play, where the GUI system or the graphic user interface system mirrors that of a cell phone or iPhone or things that the soldiers use all the time. So that's one of the things that we're checking for also on the academia side and on the industry side, that can these tools be used? And as you know, in CyberQuest, that's one of the things that we did. We said, how does that work? One of the times, I'm not going to call the name of the vendor, the soldier got down in the prone position, and the first thing the infantry soldier said, he raised his hand and said, when I get down and fight in the prone position, this is in my way. You know, we went back to the vendor and said, hey, soldier can't use this because he says he can't fight. And it doesn't matter how effective it is as a sensor, or how effective the great the tool is, infantry soldiers' first line of business is to fight. So those are things that we do and we bring back to our TICMs. And it goes full circle. We'll take that right back to TICM TR, and we'll take it right back to TICM NNS and say, hey, here's the problem and here's the issue. And then they get to those vendors and say, can you bring us a better product? That's why exercises like CyberQuest are so important, to address those issues that you're speaking of. And I think I just plugged CyberQuest again, did I? It worked? Yeah.
Yes, good morning. Lieutenant Colonel Mark de Wolf, liaison at Fort Gordon here. My question is slightly already answered on like embedding the lessons learned back to the units, but lessons learned, it's very important. In the Dutch Army, it's almost like the best kept secret because the lessons learned giving back to the units. The challenge is about how do you connect the lessons learned to doctrine and TTPs in order to drip them down to your documentation. Can you elaborate a little on that?
I'd kind of like to grab that. The beauty of it is we're right across the hall from Matt and all the Doctrine Writers. That helps a lot. But some of the things that we do is we will travel together on occasion. We'll take a Doctrine Writer with us. We took 2 Doctrine Writers out to Fort Hood, Texas last week to a 3-corps conference, and we sat down with all the G6s and S6s and talked. We didn't get a chance to discuss doctrine in depth, but they met the Doctrine Writers. So the following day, we stayed an additional day, went down and visited an expeditionary signal battalion, sat down with a company commander, a battalion commander, and platoon leaders and said, okay, these are the doctrine products that we're writing. What do you need to see in it? And I can tell you they truly appreciated being on the end of being able to help build it as a user versus receiving it and saying, you know, who wrote this? So we do that. And then we actually ended up, which I thought was extremely generous, we had 2.5 hours on the Corps G6's schedule. Sat down with Colonel Jeff Schroeder and some of his folks up there at the Corps headquarters, and they went through the products. And they were saying, hey, you know, you don't need this anymore, those types of things. On some other occasions, we've offered up and had maybe a course manager or training developer travel with us out to an NTC or a JRTC. We attend a National Guard conference. We took the folks out there that developed the Combined Arms Training Strategy, the old RTEP for the Army. We took them with us. They actually had products for every unit that was there. And they said, hey, we're going to be next door if you want to talk to us. And the units lined up because they had all the CATS products for that specific unit. So there is a good collaboration going on. And I think it just helps feed the entire process. Did I answer your question?
Well, yes, partly. What you explain sometimes it sounds like ad hoc, a little. So it's like coincidental people are meeting together. Is there like a assured process?
I saw Matt looking at me like,
Matt,
Yeah.
please take the microphone and answer.
Hello, my name is Matt Hunter. I work in Doctrine Branch, Doctrine Division, author of FM 312, a few other products. What we do on purpose, we talk to our lessons and best practice analysts. All of our authors do that for each of their books. A specific example to this topic, cyberspace, FM 312, there are portions of that book that are in FM 312 based on information brought back from the lessons of best practice analysts from CTC rotations. So things about the SEMA section, where it's located in the 3. Why is the SEMA section in the 3? It started on a lesson in best practice brought back from one of the lesson best practice analysts. So as far as process, we always pass our books. We staff them with our lesson and best practice analysts also if it's new information. Hey, does this make sense? Is this what you're seeing at the CTC rotations? We work right across the office from each other. We see each other every day. We talk, and that's on purpose.
Good morning, Sergeant First Estewire. I'm just coming off a rotation, ACRC, with 188th and their Fort Stewart. And a lot of these deficiencies you've identified are exaggerated in your Compo 2 and 3 units that we work with down there. Now, I have a unique experience of knowing exactly what your office does and has to offer. So I educate my fellow CTs on lessons of best practices. But have you ever given thought to developing a formal relationship with First Army in order to get at these OCTs at the beginning stage of their job? I know a lot of them never even heard about lessons of best practices, and I think that's a bigger problem with NCO training, but we could close that gap by, again, developing a formal relationship with these OCTs for the Compo 2 and 3 units.
I will tell you that probably on 5 or 6 occasions a year I talk directly with Colonel Bruce Mumford. And the most recent discussion we had, we were at an XCTC for the National Guard, 1 year out from their rotation, and had a discussion with him because the OCs that were out looking at the unit did not bring a signal OC with them, so we were able to kind of cover down on that gap. So I guess the short answer is yes, we do talk with them. Colonel Mumford, we also coordinate with the MCTP guys out of Leavenworth, have filled some gaps that they've had as well. So we're really digging deep. Matter of fact, Lewis and Mr. San Miguel were recently over at the USARC conference that was held, last month, I believe, talking with USARC about some of the upcoming exercises and how we can assist them as well.
Chief Stewart, you can actually have 2 questions this time.
No, there's a limit, 1 question per.
It's kind of like the vitamin, 1 a day.
So the first question is, I guess, I kind of want to know, what is your assessment of Intel support to basically the non-lethal functions, EW, cyber, maybe IO as well, as you go out and look at the rotations at NTC and the CTC, or at the CTC rotations? The second question is, dealing with the home station training, not just home station training, but any training that goes on, the biggest problem that electronic warfare guys, and excuse me if I tend to stay on electronic warfare, I'm an electronic warfare technician, but the electronic warfare guys run in is the way the formations are set up. It's really difficult to pull EW guys away from, doing land and ammo and all that stuff to get them to actually do the training. So are you seeing, when you go out to specific units, that actual thing? I'm going to tell you like this. I just got back from downrange last week, and even downrange, you have individuals not actually doing electronic warfare jobs. So they're not doing their primary duties. They're doing secondary duties as a primary duty. So as you go around and you see that, what type of information is lesson learned taken back to Cyber Center of Excellence or maybe Doctrine to kind of get after that?
Hey, so I'm going to answer that second part first, and then we'll go to the Intel piece, which I think you and I have talked anyway. But yes, that is a persistent observation. EW guys are not being used in their job. It was a persistent observation by me as an EW OCT at NTC for the entire 3 years I was there. I know it's a persistent observation from Mark, and I've only seen like 2 rotations worth of reports from it. Now, lessons and best practices has captured that. That has come back. Now, in the short term, at least from what I'm aware of from going around the COE, no, there's not going to be some kind of immediate fix to this solution. However, in the long term, as we transition over to cyberspace operations, there will be long-term answers to this problem, where not only are those EW guys coming out of those battalion slots where they're being used as an extra body, or as, I know a lot of our senior guys like to say extra worker for EW. They will be coming out of that, and they will be going more into an operator role. And they will have a unit of their own, to call their own as an EW guy. A lot of units are already doing this. So at NTC in particular, we had 3 units in my time there that, as a pilot, consolidated their guys out of the battalions, created EW teams, begged and borrowed for equipment from around industry and the Army and anywhere they could get it, and they went out and executed EW operations. So, and that's already happened. You see it in 18th Airborne Corps with some of your brigades already. 1st Brigade at 82nd is a great example. They are already doing it, and they've gone out on their own, reached out for equipment, and they're training their guys to go out and do the mission. So there's individual examples of that. And oh, by the way, when 1st 82nd does that, I've already hit Chief Byers. He needs to tell us when he does events like that so that we can come and observe and capture those observations. But we need to know about that. So I have the information that I have from NTC, and that's great, but what's happening in the future, we still need to know about that stuff so we can come out and capture that stuff and bring it back. Now, the second part, the Intel piece. And I will make no bones about it, the Intel support to electronic warfare is broken. It is something that has been brought up to the Intel Center of Excellence. They are very well aware of it, and they are starting to address the problem. So we have efforts underway that in the future will bring more of Intel support to EW, because a lot of it, they'll be working hand in hand on things, which is the way it's supposed to be. A persistent observation I had from NTC was the EW guys, a lot of the times don't get any intel from their organic systems in the BCT. And there's a multitude of reasons for that. It's not just the intel guys don't want to talk to them. It's not just that. Those are all kind of intel internal things. But what I was seeing is that as EW capabilities were coming on station to support these units, the EW guys were actually supporting the intel guys with that information that they would need for intel, which is completely backwards from the way it's supposed to be, right? Intel feeds operations, drives operations, not really the other way But there are things coming up to address that. Oh. So Mr. Neal passed me a note here to give a little bit of a hawk for Cyber Blitz. So that is part of what we are working on at Cyber Blitz. And I will say the first time that I was able to bring that up to ICO was through Cyber Blitz working groups. So another shout out to Matt and the gang. Events like that bring us together, guys in the operational field and the institutional field, come together with some of these people that are sitting at the COEs that don't get to go out to a place like NTC or JRTC and see these things happening. So then we're able to say face-to-face to them, hey, look, this is broken. SIG and support at EW is broken. It doesn't exist right now for the most part. So these are things that we need to fix. Engagements like Cyber Blitz help that out.
So I'll give you the skinny from what I've learned. I retired in 2014, but I came out of ForceCom G6. I was on the MCAT team, the Mission Command Assessment, Turn to Assistance team. And one of the things that we have to do, and I've learned as an analyst, since we've been going out, LMBP analysts, is we have to change the culture. That's the biggest issue that we have in the field today. We have to change the culture of the combatant commander. If they don't know how important that EW officer is, if they don't know how important that spectrum manager is, they will simply not use them in the right capacity, and that's across the board. If that combatant commander, I'll use the example of CPOF, and I'll be brief. Who remembers when CPOF first came out, everybody thought it was the best thing in the world, and nobody used it?
Well, I didn't think it was the best thing in the world, but I used it.
It was sold as that's the command post of the future. Then ForceCom came back and said, you know what, you will use it. And I know because I was on a team that was part of enforcing that standard. We went out. It was one of our lines of effort to ensure. Matter of fact, you were a fail on that if you on your report card with the MCAT if you didn't use CPOF. Well, we got what we asked for, and that's kind of bad because now we have combatant commanders that are used to everything. They're used to seeing everything. They're used to going on DDS and subscribing to every little nook and cranny. And now we're fighting in a contested environment. So now we're going to have to dummy it down and back up and back to what? Go back and fight to our lower TI. So now we have commanders that are used to fighting and having all these assets. We have to be able to pull them back and have them fight at a lower level using these things and telling them why it's so important that they have the minimum. The main reason for it is because of survivability. If you go to any premier fight unit now, and I've been to several of them, I went to their warfighter exercises, they no longer have the traditional Taj Mahals. Who remembers those big gigantic things that we had? You can't fight like that anymore because of survivability. And because once we fight in a congested environment here, we're going to have to be able to fight and stand up because the battle doesn't stop. I was always told, and I can't remember who first told me this, and I know it's a quote from somebody famous, I can't remember, but it says the enemy has a vote. And as long as the enemy has a vote, we have to be able to move. We have to be able to fight simultaneously. We have to be able to fight at the lowest level. We have to bring back map reading skills. We have to bring back talking to human interaction, line of sight. All those great things are going to come back. That's how we're going to fight and win the next battle because we know for a fact we're going to be in a contested and or congested environment, and we're more likely than not going to lose our upper TI. And until we change the environment, and until we change the culture and let the combatant commanders know that that's how they're going to have to fight, those things are going to happen, sir. The putting the people in the wrong position, using them out of, you're going to have your 25 Bravo, your 25 Delta working in the contact vault because the commander doesn't know how important that network defender is. You're going to have the EW officer doing something different on the staff of the S6 section because the commander simply doesn't know how important the EW officer is.
Good afternoon. Major Ray Blaine. I'm with the Cyber Protection Brigade. First, it was good to hear actually out loud that they do have jammers at JRTC. I almost got fired as a captain multiple times, and nobody ever admitted that. But my question is a little off that topic. So we talked about the training centers and capturing the lessons learned there, and the exercises and capturing the lessons learned there. The training centers are just a small aspect of what we do in the cyber world, a very important aspect, but a small aspect, and the exercises, unfortunately, are typically very canned and don't really match reality of what the teams are doing out there on the larger enterprise. So my question is, how are we capturing those lessons learned? So there are probably 10 to 15 teams out right now that are doing things. So how are we capturing those lessons learned from the DCO side And then really the same question from the OCO side. Granted, I know we have classifications and more challenges there, but just because it's hard doesn't mean we shouldn't be capturing those and informing our defense and stuff from those lessons learned.
Well, with the pause here, GILIS has the capability of having classified on there. So what we really have to do, and I know Rick was working an effort with one of our analysts and the CPB to start capturing those and posting them on the classified side of GILIS. Part of it is bringing them to us as well. Colonel Grutner mentioned AR 11-33. Everybody's supposed to have a knowledge manager in their unit at a brigade level and above. So it doesn't stop you from having a lessons learned analyst or knowledge manager or whatever it is you want to call them within your unit to capture those things. One of the things that we oftentimes jokingly call it, we don't call it a lesson learned, we call it a lesson noted because we don't change the behavior. Or as Mr. Prater back there said, well, we sometimes we like to just admire the problem. So we need to, it's a two-way deal. If you want to bring those things to us and capture them and catalog them so that you've got that archive, no problem doing that. But I offer that up to you. And you're right. It's hard to replicate what you're doing real world in a closed network like that. So we need that stuff. We do.
Just to caveat what Mike said, hey, we're not seeing a lot of CPT teams coming through JRTC. I can't speak for NTC, but we don't see a lot of cyber protection teams coming down working with the brigade. Now, the brigade always does, they always request it, but it seems like either those teams are too busy and they never seem to make it down to the JRTC. Now, last rotation was the National Guard unit. That was rotation 1708. Those guys, the Cyber Op 4 were not able to do anything on the RTU's network, the rotational training unit. They had ESM. Now, I went through their home station training and I coordinated with the 93rd to get some cyber LNOs to train ESM. I coordinated with PEO C3T to have them come and train HBSS. This is successful. They were successful. CyberOp 4 were not able to do anything on the network. And I really relate that back to knowing the CND, the Cyber Network Defenders, knowing their equipment and knowing how to use it.
So from the NTC standpoint, first I'm going to defend us at the training centers, that I don't think the scenario is very canned. And even if it is canned, for a canned scenario, units are still regularly getting their butts kicked. So we have seen more of the cyber protection teams, but that has come along with the CSCB rotations. Because
we don't get that at JRTC.
So JRTC doesn't get it because they don't like our cyber. No, I'm just kidding.
That's why I'm in the middle.
So our cyber started to do more pilots at NTC because it was a larger area. There was more infrastructure available readily at NTC. And so since our cyber owns the CPB, our cyber was tasking the CPB to provide more of those teams to support rotation. So for 1507, for the very first pilot of CSCB, that was at JRTC, there was a cyber protection team on ground. Then for each NTC rotation, there was also a cyber protection team. And it came at varying levels depending on, one, what was available from CPB, and two, what we had learned from previous rotations. Now, in my experience, I don't think it's necessary to have CPB support NTC rotations. I think the biggest thing that CPB was doing to support those CSCB rotations was providing either a 255 Sierra and 25 Deltas or personnel to replicate the capabilities that those guys bring to the fight to the brigade combat teams, because those slots exist at the brigade combat teams. And those are the network defenders at the brigade combat team. So to me, that's the most helpful thing that CPTs have done in support of the NTC and JRTC, really.
All right, and I'm Colonel John Moulter. I'm the newest member of the Doctrine and Lessons Learned team. I just got there last Monday, I believe. So I work for Lieutenant Colonel Grutner and Lieutenant Colonel Packer. So if you have, I know one of the biggest problems we have, from when I came in the Army in 2005 till now, I really didn't know about lessons learned and what was out there. I knew call existed, but that's usually talking about maneuver stuff, and I got all that figured out from ROTC. But I didn't really understand where to find products from the signal cyber side of the house. So we do understand that we have a marketing problem. And Lieutenant Colonel Packer and Lieutenant Colonel Grutner are going to solve that for us here in the very near term. We're going to reach out to the schoolhouses. We've got to reach out to you all. So if you have an event that's coming up and you think there'd be value in lessons learned collection, then by all means reach out to us. If you have a problem that you can't solve, reach out to us. We'll find a lessons learned to plug against it. We're a big Army. These things are happening all over the Army, and we can help you get the answers you need. And if you've got ideas on how to better reach out to you with products that we produce. If we need to come on an annual basis and talk to your corps, your division, signal cyber community on lessons learned, let us know. We'll do everything we possibly can to help get the word out. I know we're running out of time, so I'll turn it back over.
Sir?
Okay, so the last questions to my governmental lead. He works very long in lessons and best practices. What was your issue you have solved with the least effort and the largest output in your time you work for lessons and best practice?
Well, it's good afternoon now. My name is Rick San Miguel. I'm the government lead for lessons and best practice. And one of the things, I don't want to say one of the issues, but one of the challenges that we've had is what we've talked about is getting out there, the marketing piece, and getting the information out there to everybody. And one of the things that I also wanted to add that wasn't brought up, that we do have contact back to the units. So there is a letter that gets sent out to some of the organizations, to the active Compo 1 organizational units and stuff, you know, if we can provide that assistance to them as they ramp up for the CTCs as well. One of the things that we do want to get more involved in is getting that information out through the institutional schoolhouse and as well as also to the operational units as well. So again, one of the biggest challenges that we do have is the marketing piece, as it's been brought out. There's a lot of folks that do not know where that lessons and best practices existed. And I'll caveat back to Colonel Moulter, as he mentioned that call, the Center of Army Lessons Learned, a lot of that information is also coming out of from the maneuver side, but very little that's captured from the signal, the cyber, and so forth. So that's something that's a challenge that we want to make sure that we get it more to the surface and exposed.
Okay, thank you for visiting us. I think we had interesting discussions the last hour, and I hope it was also interesting for you, and I hope you know how we can help you, or at least we exist and we can help you, and you saw our observations, and perhaps you can imagine how we can solve our observed gaps and problems. So thank you for visiting us.
No, not really. First Brigade didn't do that bad. So there's the dude that was here, so I don't know if you knew Captain Birdie. He was the EWO. So he's actually on maneuver support center now. He's doing like, Greg brought up the pre-command courses. He does a pre-command course over there now. That means stuff. So Birdie's a smart dude. We got to first find out why. Yeah. Birdie just like walked up on me one day. So I was in RSY for another rotation. He was there for LTC. And he just like walks in my office one day. I'm like, who's this guy? Oh, great. Glad to hear, sir. If you come in low, I can always exceed them. Yeah, all the time. Oh, no. Yeah, Joe and I were like this for the longest time. But since I'm not in NBC anymore, it's all okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, absolutely.